A marked sense of geometry looms large in this, perhaps the oddest of all Piero's works, made around 1458. It shows the flagellation of Christ, tied to a column, being whipped by curiously languid Roman soldiers while Pontius Pilate looks on. In the foreground, three men dressed in the clothes of contemporary aristocrats seem oblivious to what's happening. There have been numerous interpretations of the work and its iconography, the most interesting of which relates the three men to diplomats in the conflict between Christendom and the Turks. But the impact of the painting is spatial. It's like a giant chessboard on which the figures have been placed, and the perspective is so elaborately worked out that it can actually be reproduced in plan and elevation, creating a claustrophobic stage set in which a brutal ritual nonchalantly takes place. In 1458, Piero comes here to Rome to decorate the papal apartments of Pius II, work which was subsequently covered up a few decades later by Raphael. But then, according to reports, Piero hears news that his mother's died, so he returns back north to San Sepolcro. It seems likely that sometime soon after the death of his mother, Piero began to work on one of his most celebrated and popular images, this one, the Madonna del Parto. Now, the Madonna del Parto means the Madonna of the Delivery, which is slightly a misnomer because she's not giving birth here, but is clearly in a heavily pregnant state. And the work resides in the small hill town of Monturchi, about 6 miles or so from San Sepolcro, and it was in a church where there was an altarpiece already in existence, and Piero painted this fresco over it, and it's now been moved to a rather drab school building behind protective glass to protect it from all the pilgrims who come from all over the world to look at it. Essentially, it's an image of revelation. The two angels on either side of the Virgin pull open this canopy or tent to reveal her. And at the same time, it mirrors the gesture that she's making with her hand, pointing to her womb, the idea of what's inside and what is about to burst forth, which in turn rhymes with this amazing space that Piero has created from the canopy behind her. And this idea of flip rhythms and rhymes in the painting is wonderfully exemplified with the two angels, who in fact, if you look at, are a mirrored image, one of the other. And this stems from the fact that Piero seems to have used the same cartoon or drawing, sketch, from one to the other, but just reversed it. And he's done the same with the colours of their robe and their wings, this browny red and green. The heart of the picture, and the dominant, most dramatic central image, is the opening in the Virgin's dress, to which she points. And we read this in two ways. Firstly, vaginal. This is the opening through which Christ will be born. But we also read it as a wound. And in a way, this anticipates or prophesies Christ's wounds on the cross. So in an image of birth, death is also present. But Mary, as the carrier of the Christ child, is also a symbol of hope, because through the birth of Christ, people will be saved. It's a route to salvation and redemption. People come from all over the world to look at this image, but its power is enhanced by our knowledge of what it was originally intended for. When it was there as an altarpiece in a church, it formed part of a cult that had developed in the 14th century throughout Tuscany and then into Umbria, where pregnant women would come to pray in front of images like this for the safe delivery of their child. And those who couldn't conceive came to pray for fecundity or fertility, that they might themselves have children. And when we look at this image and we compare it, say, to other images that Piero's made of the Virgin Mary, it seems more personalised, less generalised. And we can't help but think that this might have something to do with his own relationship to his mother and his state of mind after her death. The Madonna del Parto is perhaps Piero's most explicitly personal painting, but it was soon to be eclipsed by the most ambitious work of his entire life. Piero della Francesca's most spectacular work is here in the Cappella Maggiore in the Church of San Francisco in the hill town of Arezzo. He began the work sometime around the middle of the 1450s, and we know he'd finished it by 1466. An epic saga in fresco, filling the wall with 15 or so grand scenes telling the story of the true cross. Now, the piece was commissioned by a wealthy mercantile family, the Bacci, but the tone of the piece was established by the Franciscan order who ran this church. And from the beginning, Piero was original. He wanted to experiment and innovate. not least with the technique of fresco. Now traditionally it's done on wet plaster, which Piero does to begin with, but restoration and cleaning has shown that in fact he also used tempera and oils on top of the surface of the fresco once it had dried to give it a kind of lustre and a sheen. Tragically, in the 19th century, these frescoes were badly restored and there was damp in them, and so some of them have been obliterated, but there's still enough here for us to see quite what an achievement it is. Now, the story of the True Cross effectively is a 13th century epic saga that details the cross as an instrument of salvation, how it's lost and found and finally restored to Jerusalem, and all of that is told by Piero. But from the beginning he has his own original vision. So he starts right at the top with something totally from his own imagination. That is the aging Adam and Eve talking to their 3 children about the consequences of their original sin, from which, of course, salvation springs in the form of the cross. And from then on in, it's a saga really of Hunt the Cross in various forms, in the various images that he paints. Historians tell us that a contemporary audience would have made immediate sense of this work, but I find it an amazingly complex experience, where your eyes are drawn from left to right, from right to left, up and down, and crossways. And it seems to me there's the logical mind of a rather complex mathematician at work here. What I like is how you start to make these extraordinary juxtapositions, the most powerful of which are the 2 vast battle scenes that are on the lowest walls that in fact are closest to the viewer, starting on the far wall with an image of Constantine, the first Christian emperor, defeating the infidel who scramble out of the river and off into the distance without any violence at all. All he does is show the cross to them, and rather than using military might, a miracle has taken place. On this wall, mirroring the non-battle scene we've just seen over there, Piero produces one of the most powerful depictions of a battle, I think, anywhere in Italian art. It reveals itself to you in different ways and in different facets every time you look at it. For a start, Piero seems to have done 7 or 8 layers deep of soldiers, 3 or 4 of which you could say are unnecessary, but he wants to marshal this idea of chaos. And when you look at the work, you see extraordinary images, expressions of fear, of anger, of humility, odd vignettes, like the limbs of a figure on the extreme left-hand side, bent at the knee and framing a head that's been decapitated. And it's one of those works that seems both intensely personal as well as universal. And in fact, we know that Piero may have witnessed the celebrated Battle of Anghiari in 1440 when the Milanese fought the Florentines, but also we do know that in 1453 he was issued with a crossbow by the commune of San Sepolcro in case he needed to fight in a battle against the Neapolitans. And so this sense of claustrophobia and of being involved is probably the result of some kind of direct experience. The real impact of this work, though, through its ambition, through its scale, through its drama, through its sheer bravura, is that it seems to push Piero della Francesca right to the forefront of Italian and indeed Western art, even though it was centuries before that genius was fully recognised.